So how do you think, and why do you think it is important that this season will be the one that kind of really turn the reflection on Joe, and Joe really have this like obsession and fascination kind of with himself?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, I think it's the most beautiful and like human evolution of the show because he starts out as a he's essentially an irredeemable character. He's an
Mhm.
essentially unreliable narrator. He's essentially a bad person, right? I mean, like the dude won't stop killing people, like that's it, right? So what is this whole exercise we're doing? We're looking at the concept of love. Like, what do we think love is? What do we think love does? Is it capable of changing people?
Mhm.
People, how much change are people capable of? What does a real love relationship look like
Yeah.
rather than objectification, possession, competition, that kind of thing, punishment,
Mhm.
Um, I think, frankly, that whether or not Joe is realizing it, we, the show, like, are realizing, oh, the things I'm looking for that I want and the things that make me angry and challenge me the most, they're actually all in me. They're not in someone else.
Mhm.
So you is, oh, you came into the bookstore. I
Mhm.
like you. I want you. Oh, but you have problems. And so I'm going to help change you and save you. And then we can be happy. But it's
Mhm.
actually like, no, man, you're not looking at all at yourself, your problems, or actually your virtues. That's what a real loving relationship is, where both partners are working on themselves and actually making
Mhm.
sacrifices for each other, to some degree, like believing in that institution of the relationship. So I think the show is on that evolution where whether or not Joe realized it, the show realized it. Like we can't look at
Yeah.
anyone else anymore. We have to look at me. So in a way, the show has become me, not me, but Joe. No
Yeah.
longer is it Joe looking out into another person, objectifying them, putting them in the box. He
Mhm.
is he has become the prey. He's made himself the prey, and so
Yeah.
that's yeah, I really love that evolution.
Yeah. And it was interesting for me as, in part one, as we're kind of learning that Rhys was you for this season. And I was like, this is interesting direction. And then go through part one and part two till we get to the point where they're on the bridge and this conversation is happening. And I'm like, this makes perfect sense. This every like it going from these types of fascinations the character had to kind of turning it inward seemed like a natural progression. And I think that's definitely the way that the show has panned out so far.
Yeah, no, I mean, to me, it's not only a natural progression, but it's the most like emotionally resonant. It's the things
Mm.
that, it's really the sign of emotional maturity that anybody has if you're going to have a successful relationship, which by the way is really hard. Um, like past a certain point, that this is something like the show doesn't have the best answers necessarily, but it is asking the right question and doing it
Yeah.
in a pretty like interesting and tireless way. And then I think there's also this aspect of Reese that is cool where rather than having like me play the guy, which would have taken a lot more time and money that just wasn't going to happen, and it wouldn't have been as interesting, I think,
Yeah.
at least for me, because I got to do it with another person. And so then what you get is, even though it's a figment of his imagination, you get to see Joe in like in an intimate male relationship, which
Mm-hmm.
again, you just almost never see. You get glimpses of it every season, but mostly the only other time we've had it, I think, was pretty iconic with 40 in season two,
Yeah. Yeah.
played by
Yeah.
Scully. So and I loved that relationship, and I think people really responded to that one. So this one has shades of that, I think, too.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. I can't wait for everyone to see this new season.
Thanks, man.
First off, we don't really see as much as Nadia in part one as we do in part two, and that's when her story, really kicks up. Why do you think that Nadia was kind of the perfect character this season to be that match for Joe?
Because I think out of she's apart from Joe, she's like almost as if not just as she's so intelligent, and so
Mm-hmm.
is Joe, and that's why Joe always succeeds, and
Yeah.
why he's the one who always comes out on top, because he surrounds himself, or maybe not intentionally, but he's always around people that are not as intelligent as him, and are like he's always two beats in front of everyone, as where Nadia isn't.
Yeah.
And I think in the second half, she sees more of Joe, like outside of university. And so when you see more of someone, you get to know them more. And I think that's why it doesn't take her long to figure it out,
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think intelligence wise, he's met his match.
Yes, yes. And some of my favorite scenes throughout the season were the scenes that you shared with Tati, when Nadia and Marianne were working on this plan to get her out. And that the twist, when the twist happened, for a minute there, I was like, I know they did not bring Marianne back, and she's gone. So like, I was so happy to see that, just because her arc during season 3 was so powerful, and it remains the same for this one as well. So why do you think it was so important to have these characters team up? Because as we've seen in previous seasons, she could have been the next Beck or the next Love, but this character wasn't. So how do you think it was important to have these two characters work it out, and then kind of Nadia ends up in prison, but for Marianne to prevail at the end, especially as a woman of color?
Well, we both are. So I think it was they're both two female characters that like have actually been the lucky ones in terms of what Joe could have done to them.
Yeah.
So for them to come together, it was like, it's something that's never been seen on, actually no, it has been seen on the show before, but without one of them ending up dead, straight away or soon after. So I think they both had this immediate understanding for one another, and they were both if you like, they spend no time getting to know each other. It's just like, what are we going to do to help you? And she sees Marianne in danger, and she's like, let's come up with a plan. And they're both desperate, but Marianne's desperate because she's been in this situation. Nadia just, I think she sees another woman in danger, so she's desperate to help her. So I think that's why. I mean, who knows how we'd react in that situation? It's mad,
Yes. And in previous seasons, there's kind of been like one character, maybe two characters that are, the you that Joe is like in search of. But like, I think this season, Rhys can be you, Nadia can be, Marianne can be you, Kate can be you. It's kind of like a mashup of everyone. So like, because we know of Nadia's fate at the end of this season, there's possibility for her to, still, get revenge on Joe. So what would you think the next step looks like for your character?
I don't think she'd sit quiet for very much longer. Like, we've seen this girl, she doesn't like hold back, and she's brave. So I think if she's keeping quiet for now, it's because she's plotting something. She's not the type to give up at all. I don't know where she'd go, but I don't think she'd shut up for too long.
I'm aligned on that thought process too. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me, and I can't wait for everyone to see this fantastic season.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.
My first question is for both of you. Tilly, if you could go first. So when we first meet Adam and Phoebe, for me in part 1, I just felt like, they were just like this upper class, this rich person's romance. And as we see in part 2, there's actually a lot going on in terms of, how communication impacts relationships, how mental health impacts one in a relationship, and how the relationship affects their mental health and vice versa. There's a lot to unpack. So I wanted to ask, how would you describe the evolution and the journey of this romance throughout this entire season?
Oh gosh. Well, I think it kind of goes back to how they were both kind of brought up, that they don't really have a great example of what love is anyway, because they've never really been shown it in a way that they can communicate with properly and honestly with their family. So I think kind of two very lonely and confused people come together, and it's, despite all their love and romance, it's, it's probably not going to work out until one of them gets some help. But yeah, it's just unfortunate that by nature, Phoebe sees the best in people and is very, very generous and giving. And if she's partnered with someone who perhaps is more of an opportunist, then it's kind of, that equation isn't going to work out well for, it seems, Phoebe, really.
Yeah, I think for me, I agree with everything Tilly said. I think they both were brought up in situations that were not the best examples of showing unconditional love. And I think for Adam, he was dealing with a lot of guilt, a lot of repressed feelings, a lot of unsolved trauma, and the inability to communicate that to your partner and someone that you love to be completely transparent, completely honest about all your wants and your needs without feeling like, you know, he's going to be judged or reprimanded for it, which is crazy, because if anyone would be the most understanding person, I think it would be Lady Phoebe. So it just, you know, we unraveled the truth to his inner life, and I wish he could be honest with Phoebe.
Yes, yes. And I want to ask you both as well. How would you describe your characters' relationships with Go? You know, Phoebe, I feel like Phoebe is definitely intrigued by Go throughout the course of the season. I also think that Adam is as well, you know, intrigued but also threatened, but also intrigued as well. And how that kind of, you know, changes forms throughout part one and part two. So how could you both speak to how your characters have this interesting dynamic with Joe amidst everything that he has going on in his head?
Well, you know, Phoebe does see the best in people, and I think she just sees a man who doesn't have any friends come to a new country, and she wants to take him under her wing, and instantly that he is her new best friend and her new shiny thing that she wants to show off. And it's interesting that Phoebe would never ever suspect that Joe, or Jonathan as she calls him, would be capable of anything, you know, other than being a nice person that's very suitable for her best friend Kate. Mm-hmm. And it's it's weird because like I never had any scenes with Penn where he had any kind of darkness, because he was always so lovely to her.
Yeah, I think for me there was a lot of, I felt like he was a kindred spirit to Adam. He was his, you know, being a fellow expat American in this new thing, he was like a fellow fish out of water, and he wanted to trust him. And he had a lot of times where he's like, I see you, you're lonely too, you feel out of place here, I get you. But then mixing that with, don't cross me, don't get close with my girl or my crew, and don't make me look bad. Do not make me look bad, because there will be consequences. I just had like thoughts there.
Yeah.
Wow. I was like, you were taking us back and see. You're taking us back and see.
Yeah, no, that's my acting work.
Unseen.
Hilton Smith, my acting teacher. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for chatting with me. I can't wait for everyone to see the season. So first off, I wanted to know, when you know, read the script and you were familiarizing yourself with the character of Rhys, did you know that a lot of the twists that happened throughout, you know, the season, such as, you know, a lot during part two, you know, him being a hallucination of Joe and kind of like a reflection of this other part of himself, did you know that the character was going this deep, or did you just know the Rhys that we were introduced to in the first part of the season?
Trey, I did know. I knew it all. I had every detail, which was great, which was complete gold. And I think, you know, Sarah Gamble realized I had to know in order to play this part, really, because he is quite complicated, and because of how the show is set up and the devices used in this particular season, I think it would have been impossible to have not had massive intelligence.
Yes, and you know, it's interesting that like you said, the devices that are used this season, because in prior seasons I felt like, you know, the you that was the subject of the season for Joe, you know, first season it was Beck, then it was Love, then, you know, the season 3 was kind of Love and Marianne. But in this season there's so many like yous. It could be Marianne, it could be Kate, you know, toward the end of the season it could be Nadia. But like one of the crucial you, I think, is Rhys, and kind of like this reflection that, you know, Joe is kind of, you know, seeing himself, that manifests itself as this hallucination of Rhys. So why do you think this is important to kind of like have this character be this first time that Joe is actually kind of seeing himself as this person that he's like has love for, in certain aspects, who he's like yearning after, being kind of like his own self that he hasn't kind of really unpacked before?
I think it's a good question. I feel that it was necessary. I think it was necessary to shake the show up, because, you know, I feel that whilst what had happened previously had been hugely successful and popular, it's good to make adjustments. And I think audience members and lovers of the show are incredibly intelligent, and they want to be kept thinking and guessing. And I think it's important to twist it completely. I feel that also it was good to maybe move it away from being obsessed with women all the time, and maybe we need to look at a different avenue. And I think this was a particularly creative way of doing it, because obviously we don't we don't realize until much later on that it's actually him looking at himself, or a manifestation of himself. He's a very ill man, really. He's incredibly sick to be creating that voices in your head character. That's a very far gone place to be. So I think it was necessary. I think it was important. It was necessary, and also from a creative point of view, it was a lot of fun because I was allowed. You just as that being that character, being that mirror, that manifestation, you're allowed so much freedom, and you're allowed a great amount of space and room to breathe and explore and be the darkest you possibly can, but also be as as needly and as manipulative as possible.
Yes. And it was interesting for me as a viewing experience because like when I was watching it, at one point I was like, okay, why isn't Rhys like, talking to the other people within these group settings? And then like when the reveal happened, I was like, okay, maybe I was onto something. I was onto something. Maybe I saw this coming. But it was still, so fun to watch. And I think a great storyline this season for all the characters. But yes, thank you so much for chatting with me. And I can't wait for everyone to see the season. For you, what was the importance you think? Because easily it could have been written like Marianne could have been written like Beck. She could have been written like Love was. But the importance of having her, make it out at the end, and then also having another woman of color, kind of facilitate that process. They kind of hatching this plan, this master plan, and it kind of becomes a happy story at the end of this whirlwind of a season.
I think it very much speaks to the sort of inherited strength and resilience that people of color, and particularly women of color, have in just through life. We've been sort of born with this force or this power that doesn't allow us to lay down easily, that doesn't allow us to become victim of circumstance, and to not try to fight our hardest to get out of anything, of any particular situation to save our life. And yeah, we're I feel like all people of color, and particularly women of color, and particularly mothers, are extremely resourceful and will tap into those resources at any given point when needed. And so yeah, it was extremely important for me and very a big honor for me that in this show, getting to play that character in Marianne, and just give credit where credit's due, and sort of send an homage in that way.
Yes. And then when you knew that, you would be returning for season 4, did you have any idea how the story would play out? Like, did you know, like, because, Marianne was kind of like, we saw hints of her in part 1, and then part 2 was when it really kicked in. Did you have any idea that the story would like go this way? Because I just know, like, when I saw the cage, I was like, no, they're not about to do that. But we saw all worked out in. But like, how are your feelings about when you were just reading the direction and finding out like what would be discussed this season?
I was really excited actually. When Sarah like first gave me the rundown at the top of the season, I was like, oh yes, okay, bet, let's do it. So I was really pumped about it, probably in a crazy way. So yeah, but I didn't know necessarily the ins and the outs and the hows. The details like of were being sort of worked out as we were going through the season, and so it was very epic when getting those scripts to be like, oh snap, and it just gave me some really juicy stuff to sort of have to figure out as an actor, and it was definitely something fun to sink my teeth into, and I think challenged and stretched my abilities through this season. So yeah.
And I have to ask, of course, do you think this is the last we've seen of Marianne? The character has been through the ringer, but like, I'm pretty sure it's also fun to, be able to play in this type of world. So what do you think is next for her? Do you think this is the last we've seen?
I don't know. I would love to see Marianne again, but I don't know. That would be, I guess, a question for Netflix and Sarah. Yeah, I have some ideas that I would love to see her go about, but I don't know.
Awesome. Well, fingers crossed for more. But thank you so much. I can't wait for everyone to see the season.
No, thank you, Trey. It's been a pleasure seeing you.